Good afternoon and welcome. Today's webinar, presented by Provider Relations and Care Management of ACANY and LIFEPlan CCO, will be covering grant seeking for IDD providers. My name is Angie Monroe, and I'm the Director of Provider Relations for Long Island. Our presenter today is grants specialist Alyssa Spina, CEO and founder of Spina Research and Consulting. We thank you all for joining us today, and we hope you can take away an understanding of the grant writing experience. To ensure sound quality throughout the presentation, all attendees are muted without the ability to unmute. If you're having difficulty with your audio, please notify us in the chat box and you will be assisted. We welcome and encourage you to ask questions about today's presentation. Please submit your questions using the chat box and we'll answer as many as possible. At the end of the webinar, if some questions are left unanswered, they'll be included in the FAQs that will be on our website. To begin, it's my pleasure to introduce Alyssa Spina. Alyssa Spina is a grants consultant and advisor assisting nonprofits with writing, editing, and reviewing grants. Alyssa founded and is CEO of the firm Spina Research. She's authored more than 200 grants, resulting in more than 30 million in total winning awards. She has more of a decade of experience working with not-for-profits. And I would like to introduce Alyssa Spina now.
Thanks, Angela. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining today. I'm going to, before I jump into my content, I would like to just know a little bit more about who's on the call. So I just have like 3 very quick poll questions that maybe you could answer in the Q&A or chat box, and we can kind of just gauge everyone's experience and needs. The first question or poll question, on a scale of 0 to 5, what is your grant writing experience personally? Do you have no experience, 0, or are you an expert, 5? Cool. I'm seeing a little like on the beginner side, a little bit of concentration in the middle, and a couple of experts. So those of you that self-label as 4 and 5, please let me know if I've forgotten anything during this webinar. The second polling question that I had was just to get a sense of what your agency's size is. From a scale to 0 to 5, are you on the smaller side, like less than 25 staff, or are you on the larger side, like more than 500 staff? Okay, I'm seeing some small come in now, and there were a couple large in the beginning. It looks like it's a fairly even distribution. And then the last thing is, oops. What are your agency grant needs? Are you looking to support a project? Are you looking for a specific opportunity that just came out and you want to respond to it? Are you looking for a continual, or everybody's just saying all of the above? Okay, all right, great. So thank you for helping me better understand, where you all are coming from. And as I go through the webinar, I will try to weave in some of the information that might be specific to smaller agencies or larger agencies, or individuals with little experience, etc. So I have a lot of stuff to talk about today. I hope I can get through everything. But the first couple of things I'd like to talk about are just the general like pre-application process, right? What is grant writing? How do I get ready to respond to grants? How do I research grants and funders, find opportunities? How do I do that strategically so I don't feel like I'm constantly flying by my seat of my pants and my staff are mad at me because we have 5-day turnarounds on grants all the time? And How then from there, I want to talk a little bit about the actual application process, how to prepare a grant application so that it is competitive, and what does preparing a grant application look like. And then the last bit, I'll talk a little bit about trends and best practices. And I have a list of a couple of upcoming grants and some relevant funders that might be of interest to you if you don't already know them. Okay, what are the kinds of grants that exist out there? There are grants for monetary support, and I know this is a little simple, so I apologize, but I thought I'd kind of set some context first. Um, the monetary support grants can be like your typical grant, an upfront grant award. They're going to give you the money as soon as they award it to you or right after they award it to you, and then you can use it. Um, the other types, sometimes they're a little bit more complicated. You have reimbursement for certain eligible expenses. So grants that are typically reimbursement based, they come from the state. We see them a lot there. You also see them for capital projects fairly often, and that just means that they'll approve you for the grant, but you got to spend the money to get the money. Other types, matching grants, some upfront grant awards, some reimbursement grant awards require a match. That just means that they'll give you $1 for every $3 you raise, for example. Um, Less often, there's some needs-based and formula-driven grant opportunities, and then there's some sponsorship grants as well that kind of overlap in the donation area. In-kind grants can support equipment supplies. Um, you see that with a lot of medical equipment, like some medical equipment providers will actually just have an entire list of in-kind grants that they offer. And services as well can be given in kind through a grant, like technical assistance and expertise. Um, there are a lot of different types of funders out there, but generally they can be categorized into three areas. The government funders, which is going to include your federal funders, your state funders, county, local government units, your foundations, and that will range from, your smaller family foundations to your larger national foundations that have a lot of notoriety, like the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And then corporations will sometimes also have grant opportunities. Sometimes they have more of just a donation opportunity or a sponsorship opportunity. But you'll see that with a lot of your banks, insurance organizations. They'll have some yearly grants every once in a while. In terms of the level of effort for each of those, I think it's kind of listed from most amount of work to least amount of work. Very generally speaking, like there will be a foundation application that surprises me. That's a lot of work. But the government ones are generally the ones that require more time and energy, not just in developing the narrative, but ensuring that you pre-qualify, etc., gathering documents. Um, so a grant life cycle is sort of in three different phases. The pre-award phase, which is some of the stuff I'm going to be talking about now, which identifies the funding opportunities, funders, reviews applications and opportunities for eligibility and fit. And then the award phase is, obviously, and then post-award implementation, reporting, closeout, all the things that you have to do once you actually receive the funding, and you need to track the outcomes that you promised. How do you determine if you're ready to respond to grants? And how do you determine, you know, what do I need to be ready to respond to grants? Um, Three general areas that I would personally, pay attention to. One is registrations. Um, the second is agency documents, so your internal, your financial documents, your legal documents, and then I'll talk a little bit about what is the internal infrastructure that you may want to develop in order to approach grants. I'll also caveat this with by saying that a lot of the things I'm going to talk about right now are more for people who are interested in pursuing larger grants, federal grants, state grants, having a grant sort of strategy that's overarching throughout the year. This isn't necessarily, everything that you're going to need if you're going to do a one-off small community foundation grant. So I don't want to scare you if you're dipping your toes in and you want to do one grant. You're not going to need all this stuff. Okay, so there's basically four-ish systems that are utilized in the New York and US grant world. That is SAM.gov and grants.gov. Both of those are the federal registration and systems that are required. Login.gov is like a consolidated portal to log into all of them. You'll want to make sure that the sam.gov and grants.gov, and then the third grantsgateway.newyork.gov, which is the New York State one, are managed by somebody that is maintaining a schedule of when they need to be updated, and that you just have an internal resource that can answer questions on user profiles or how to update a registration, etc. Also, just highly recommend that for any grant system, because sometimes like the Community Foundation has their own portal, or like Cabrini Foundation has their own portal, you should have like a password and system tracker that you're storing somewhere that's consolidating all of this login information on one sheet. And I would highly recommend you to develop a grants@yourorganization.org email address that all of those logins can just be associated with so that you don't have issues when there's turnover in a position, for example. Um, List of commonly requested documents. These are basically actually the documents that are required to be registered in the New York State Grants Gateway. But generally speaking, you'll need some combination of a handful of these or a few of these for the different types of grants that you would be applying for. For example, like the Mother Cabrini Foundation requires a board members, requires staff bios, requires a current operating budget. The New York Health Foundation requires your Form 990. Um, so knowing that there's, these systems that you have to have logins to, these documents that you're going to have to collate from across the individual departments of your organization. There's a few different recommendations I have for developing some internal infrastructure to put processes around it. So I would say first and foremost is identifying your core grant related roles. I know sometimes people can be scared of being called a grant writer. I actually like to use the word grant activator because what that person really needs to do is be the one that's making it all of your information actionable in order to apply to grant opportunities. And so finding that person, finding your finance person, finding your program or subject matter expert, bringing them together to let them know what the expectations are around whether it's a particular opportunity or an ongoing grant capture strategy is very key. Um, Developing just processes for even like approving a grant. Who's allowed to apply for a grant? Can a director of your organization just submit a grant one-off, or does that have to go through some kind of chain to ensure that there's not missing out of certain opportunities? Maybe they asked for 5,000 when they should have asked for 50. Um, the other thing is that you're going to want to develop some resources and templates that are going to facilitate your grant application process, make it easier, create sample language that is for each of your programs, your organizational history, things that you can copy and paste over and over and over again. You're not just like redoing the same work. Also, I'm a big fan of templates that allow me to track the opportunities that I've reviewed, the funders that I've reviewed, and have ways to categorize them. Well, what did it seem like they were supporting last time? Is it mostly workforce development? And kind of notating that. Do they allow for capital requests? Notating that. This basically will allow you to very quickly understand what the landscape of funders is going to look like, and also what is missing in terms of your own material that you're going to need to develop in order to respond to a grant. The last piece is, even though grant writing isn't the same as donor development, there is still a relationship management piece. And what's really important is that you have built out mechanisms that share your impact, your value. When you receive a $25,000 grant, are you able to create a thank you card really quick that just says, over the last 6 months, we've impacted 500 people because of your funding. Thank you. Those types of things go really far, especially with local regional funders where there's more of that human interaction, a little bit less on the state and federal side in terms of the actual grant application, but certainly like networking and connections and having that type of material to share with people in support of your application are really important. And I know I'm talking very quickly so that I can make it through the really interesting stuff, because the last thing I want to talk about today is AI and grant writing, which I think is so much cooler than all this boring stuff. So if you have questions, if I gloss over something, feel free to throw it in the chat, or I'll give you my email address if you don't already have it, and you can send me an email directly. The second thing is, I know we all hate it, databases. It doesn't have to be like, a 2005 Access database. You could just use like a Google Sheet. That's what I use with all of my clients. And that's what I was talking about in the previous slide as well, which is essentially allowing us to basically understand our landscape. Are we ready to apply to something, store our documents, track our dates, store research, strategic plans, things to reference to, and then a Excel sheet or Google sheet that tracks some key data points like minimum and maximum award amounts, target populations, upcoming tasks, things like that. Um, and then I alluded to this a little bit in the first slide as well, but it's important to collect your program data and documentation in advance of grant applications, especially for if you're looking at embarking on some larger ones like the federal grants or state grants. And you would want to gather maybe like budgets. What is their current operating budget? What do the staff salaries look like? If you can get some of those things in advance, it makes the grant writing process go a lot smoother. Um, Also, whenever you can, and trust me, not a lot of people are at this point where they can just pull data on their organization like this, but work towards it, because more and more you're seeing foundations request that type of data, whether it's on your own employees or the individuals that you serve, or the outcomes that you are addressing. That is key, that you have a way to track that. And also, when you're developing your grant narrative in response to an RFP or an RFA, request for applications, you want to make sure that whatever internal data and outcomes that you project also can be tracked somehow, so that you can have a smooth post-award process. Okay, grant research. So how do I even find a grant that is going to work for me? Um, there are basically, like, in my opinion, four sources that I go to. Grants.gov, that's going to have all of your federal grants. There's like a little left-hand search bar area where you can kind of filter out the noise. Um, grantsgateway.org .newyork.gov, also one of the only ones that I utilize. And note, they say it's changing to the SFS vendor portal. They've been saying that since last year. They predicted it was going to happen April of this year, last year. So who knows when it's going to happen, but I got it, assuming it will, that might not necessarily be the resource if this lives on as a document. Um, Private, I use Foundation Center Online and I use GrantWatch. There are other resources, and I listed a few of them here. Um, Candid owns GuideStar. They collate all of the 990s across the US. They then take that data, turn it into essentially an explorer where you can look at every single foundation, who they funded, reverse search them. So you could like say, well, my competitor, I want to see, what foundations have funded them in the last 5 years. You can look up them, see who they've been funded by, the amounts, the types, all of that. It's really awesome data. I've been using that for a very, very long time. I received training in it in DC, but as far as I know, Instrumental is like the newer, better version. I'm too scared to change it because I work so well on Foundation Center. But my Instrumental is Candid, but it has opportunities integrated in it with like real due dates. So I use GrantWatch for real due dates, upcoming due dates of private foundations. It's a really great tool, has a ton of different filters by both the target population, also the geography, and then the third is you can filter by support type that you're seeking. So capital or programming, etc. Oh, and GrantWatch also does have everything like the federal and the state stuff. I just kind of prefer to go to the state to find the state stuff because more real time. How often should we conduct grant research? I do it every day. That's not realistic, and it's probably not realistic that you have someone on your staff that's going to be able to do it every single day. Sign up for real-time grant notifications when you can. The grants gateway notifications, they're the best ones, I think, because you can select what you're interested in. They come and there's no other spamming. Um, the grants.gov ones, you got to go to the individual or agencies, government agencies that you're interested in, and you can sign up for grant notifications in their individual sites. I recommend checking those like once per week or once bi-weekly if you can, just because they require the most effort, the longest turnaround time. So you're going to want to have as much time as possible to prepare your applications. Then what I did here is I actually separated this out into private free services and paid services. The reason for that is I just don't think you need to be spending thousands of dollars for like foundation research tools when a lot of that information is out there for free, or you can pay someone for less money than it costs for a foundation center application, which is like, or subscription, which is like $2,000 a year to just give you a list of funders. So buy 1 month of service if you really feel like you're about to embark on a large like grant initiative, a strategic grant initiative. Otherwise, just use the private sources. Get real-time notifications when you find a funder that is just so aligned with what you do. Go to their website, sign up for their notifications. This is where that grant@youremail.org comes in handy here. You just shovel everything into that email address and check it on a frequency that makes sense to you. Interpreting grant requirements. So typically when a grant opportunity is released, it comes with a notification of funding. That can be called anything from notification of funding opportunity, NOFO, request for proposal, RFP, request for application, RFA. Um, those are generally, those are the ones you see, and they're always using acronyms. So those will include basically 8 topics, along with a bunch of other like legalese and stuff like that. But when assessing, the fit and eligibility, and whether or not you should pursue something, whether or not it's aligned with your needs, these are sort of the core areas that you're going to want to pay attention to. So obviously the funder and the grant summary, the financial and award data, how many awards are being given out? What is the maximum award total? Sometimes there's awards for different regions. Um, what is the applicant eligibility criteria? Do you have to be a 501c3 nonprofit? Do you have to have some type of state certification? What are the allowed and ineligible expenses? Really important to have that right up front, because even if the grant is well aligned with what you're doing and what you want to do, maybe they don't fund the thing that you need. Geographic and demographic priorities. This is being weaved in more and more. I'm seeing as federal and state grants are putting priority populations in their RFAs. Required activities, that would just be like the scope of services that they want you to implement with the grant. Whenever there's a required activity section that's like called out in that grant application, the request for grant applications, I actually take it, put it in an Excel sheet, and then every row, we work together to say, all right, this is how we're doing this activity, this is how we're doing this activity, and start to actually create an implementation plan that's being generated directly from the RFP and required narratives. And then lastly, requirements for reporting and staffing and partnership are always super important to pay attention to, and I find to be the ones that are kind of ignored or forgotten about a little bit. Make sure you're just ready to report on the data. I had a client that got a very large grant, and then it turned out that they were going to have to do extensive data collection on each individual served, and a 3-month follow-up as a result of service for those individuals. And we had promised, I think it was 1,000 people were going to be touched by the grant. So it was really difficult to implement something that required that level of data collection on such a huge population. So if we had paid a little bit closer attention, or if it was more clear exactly what those reporting requirements were going to be, maybe we could have avoided that implementation issue. And then staffing and partnership requirements. Again, sometimes they require that your staff have a particular type of credential certification, like maybe you have to have a lead provider, or maybe you have to have 2 additional community-based organization partners. Sometimes you have to have a local government unit letter of support. So really understanding, who are the people that need to be involved, what resources is this going to require. I take these 8 things, put them in a Word document, and for every single grant, this is filled out, and we can quickly understand what is it going to take to respond. And I find that that works particularly well with the federal and state opportunities, because they have RFPs that are some 88 pages long, and nobody wants to take time besides me to read that. So having somebody who can kind of organize the data really quickly, and you've got it in 2 pages to digest with leadership and make a decision, is extremely useful. Okay, so assessing eligibility and fit, and determining the probability of winning. So to understand your eligibility, there's sort of like 4 criteria that you're going to look at: the eligible agency types, required certifications and licensure, geographic restrictions, and the target populations. That's always, for the most part, up front or in a specifically designated area that's called applicant eligibility. Assessing if the grant and funder fit with your agency needs. The first thing in determining fit would be to pay attention to those post-award requirements. What are you going to have to do in the implementation? Really outline that and understand, benchmark yourself to know, are you able to achieve whatever they're requiring you to achieve? And then again, the post-award burden, make sure that the money is worth it. You know, if it's $5,000 but requires insane amounts of reporting, maybe you pass on that one. Um, and then determining like the funder fit. And what I mean by that is their alignment with your mission. And the best way to do that is trying to stalk who they've funded in the past. So review their past grantees, and you will find published data for a majority of funders out there for free. You don't need Foundation Center subscription to like download the list of funded projects for Cabrini, for example. And that can really help you understand what are their funding patterns. Um, Also, funders that have cyclical opportunities, like the same exact program or grant is being offered multiple times over many years, this information is invaluable. You can't, this is going to help you not only decide if you're eligible and if it's a good fit with your needs, but it's going to help you actually frame up what your project is going to be and how you present it to the funder, because you will be able to get a glimpse into the types of things that they're attracted to, and the type of language even that they're attracted to. Um, when I estimate likelihood of receiving an award, I'm looking at 5 criteria for the most part. The first is, if it's a private foundation, family fund, what is their total giving and what is their total assets? This is so important because there are so many foundations out there that we hear about that haven't given in years. And so this is a good way to benchmark that their active grant making, as well as what would be a good potential award request, a grant request. The geographic relevance, I look at, are they located? There should be a comma there, I apologize. Are they located in the region that you serve? And have they funded in the region that you serve? Now, you can find that information, like I said, through those publicly available lists. Um, but this is where Foundation Center research does come in handy. And if you are doing a sort of strategic plan and looking to do this for multiple different funders, I would recommend getting that or a similar tool, because you can hone in on even the county that the funder has awarded grants in. So I could take a look at like a Golisano Foundation, which is known for supporting individuals with developmental disabilities in the Western and Central New York region. And I can see that, you know, they've never really funded anywhere downstate. So I wouldn't recommend that to a downstate organization typically. The other thing is the historical funding preferences. Again, this is where the Foundation Center is very helpful. Have they funded similar agencies, both in mission, like who are you serving and what is your purpose, but also in size? Are they funding massive organizations, massive research institutions, um, institutions of higher education, national organizations, or are they funding smaller organizations? Good gauge of whether or not, even if you are eligible and even if it is a good potential fit, you might not get it because you're just not the usual person or group that they support. Um, the current fundings and priorities, obviously recent grant activity is a number one indicator of whether or not you could get an award. If they aren't giving grants, then you can't get it. But also the clarity of their priorities and their website and all the things that kind of help you glean information about them. If they have a strong demonstration of what they want, what they're looking for, and you're aligning with those things, then there's a high likelihood of you getting supported. More often than not, I see foundations that have no clarity on what their priorities are. the website hasn't been updated in years. It's not user friendly. Those are things that kind of are a flag in my head that say, I'm not sure about this one. It could be iffy. And then special considerations, just things that, could be that you could be an outlier if all these things aren't aligning. Did they just recently communicate some kind of shift in funding? Or was there an announcement that there was a grant to a similar agency or cause nearby that's so aligned with what you're doing? In that case, you may have an opportunity to leverage on some of that recent grant activity. And then obviously, if you have a connection to the funder, then there might be a higher likelihood of you getting the award. So I kind of try to score funders on these criteria when I'm looking at them as a new potential match for nonprofit organizations and projects. Okay, so I keep mentioning grant strategic planning, and what I mean by that is really trying to understand what is the funding landscape and how do you create um, projects and narrative that can capture multiple different grants with the same narrative, with the same outcomes, so that you are more efficiently pursuing grant opportunities. There's sort of three steps to that, compiling your needs, meeting with leadership to understand what are all the buckets that you've got to fill, um, analyzing the funding landscape and basically taking all the different funders that maybe you identify through research or through listservs, putting them in a spreadsheet and analyzing them based on the types of grants that they're funding, the support types, capital program, etc. And then taking that information, merging it with your agency needs and finding areas that are aligned. I'll give some real world examples when I get over to that slide. Okay, so compiling funding needs, core to this is you got to create a community of idea sharing, a culture of idea sharing. Um, Oftentimes I find that when I ask an agency what type of grant they need, I'll either get like quite literally the kitchen sink, like one specific item needed for, I don't know, a daycare or something or an office. And then I'll get, well, we want to build this $18 million community center with integrated services that brings in our partners. So wide variety, right? And to include like the kitchen sink items in the big picture idea is key. But the people that are talking about that strategic grant, that strategic concept, are not the same people that know that this office needs a sink. Um, Building, and this is where the grant activator also comes in, building a way to bring that information together is so important. Um, One way that I did this with one of my clients was that we created a grant needs survey that gets sent out to like director and supervisor level staff on a weekly or monthly basis, and they update that as needed. And we basically have this running list of needs. Whenever a grant opportunity comes up, we know that the potential for the award is maybe, let's say, $100,000, and we've got a little bit of room to get to 100. We go to that list and we say, oh, this is aligned with that project. This is aligned with that project. We can build those in. Um, so I highly recommend developing some kind of internal process for that idea sharing. Um, the next thing is to really set aside time to do working sessions that are identifying agency priorities. And it's important that during those working sessions, you're talking about how the growth areas that you may be wanting to invest in are also generating either new service lines or additional revenue. What is the sustainability of those things? or how is it addressing an operational inefficiency? Because we want the grant growth areas to not only address agency need and community need, obviously, I'll get to statements of need later, but we want it to be able to support your business line, and we want it to, and I know nonprofits are not a business, but you're running an organization and you want sustainability, you want to ensure that you're long lasting. Standing grant meetings would just go over the potential grant opportunities and the approaches to them and coordinate responses to those things. I have a weekly standing grant meeting with every single one of my clients, and then on occasion, we hold working sessions with larger groups of people to incorporate feedback into the overarching grant research process. I want to just make a distinction between what an agency need is and what a funding need is. You might say, we need to renovate our facility. We need to upgrade our EHR. That is an agency need. The funding need is the EHR consultant that's going to come in and do an assessment of the different types of EHR tools that are in existence out there, or the cost of materials for the renovation of the facility. It's important to have those things lined out or written out in a budget to really be able to start to merge some of them together, because sometimes the things that could be included in like an updated EHR specific grant, like if you're applying for a grant that's only for IT, that project may have other funding needs that can go into a different grant application or be satisfied by a different funder, and you can utilize that same grant narrative that you just wrote for the IT grant for the other funder. So just being organized basically is what I'm getting at, and really understanding all the different things that are under your needs. Sorry that this is chaotic. This is how I describe um, analyzing a funding landscape, or the difference between operational intelligence and strategic intelligence. And so you have an operational intelligence process. Okay, you're going to figure out, what do I need to know about this funder? What do I need to know about this opportunity? What is driving the grant making of this funder or the opportunity? Do the historical funding analysis, look at their web presence, look at a network analysis of the people that are on their board, whatever. Really understand them. And then the application of that operational intelligence on that one funder or grant is to provide direction to the leadership to say, hey, here's how you should pursue this funding. Here's what's going to be required to implement the grant. Here's what the funder's key priorities are. And here's some of the potential ways that we can approach an implementation plan, or who I think we should include. But then taking that and doing that across multiple funders and in multiple open grant opportunities to find commonalities is getting you a lot closer to that strategic intelligence piece. Finding the commonalities across funders, what I mean by that is, once you start to create a list of, maybe it's 15, 20, 25 different potential funders or funding opportunities, you'll categorize them, like they like to support workforce development, they like to support capital projects, they like to support direct services, they like to support IT. You'll get groupings like, oh, all these 5 grant funders really like to support IT. I have one $1 million IT project that can be funded by these 5 grant funders. And then lastly, taking that strategic intelligence, that understanding of funder trends and commonalities, and developing long-term funding concepts that are grabbing multiple categories. So taking the IT, taking workforce development, taking a little bit of direct service, putting them all together and having one very interesting or sexy, whatever project that then can get funded by all 5 of the IT funders, all 3 of the workforce development funders, all whatever, and that is really the strategic part. So grant growth areas are going to be those areas, the ones that are strategically aligning the commonalities across the funders into one project. You're going to want to make sure that as you're identifying those, like I stressed in a few slides back, that it's supporting your revenue generating activities, that it's aligned with your strategic plan, that there are internal dedicated resources to actually help with the grant development and management, and make sure that those growth areas can then be tied to some measurable outcomes. What's cool when you have those grant growth areas is that your measurable outcomes are so different, varied, interesting. You'll have one that's a direct service, will serve 1,000 people. We'll have another that's maybe a reduction in workforce turnover. So I think that those types of, it makes for a more competitive grant. And then lastly is creating a grant roadmap. So it's taking all that stuff, putting it into one tracker, and really being able to monitor the opportunities that have upcoming deadlines and the development of the applications. Okay, so well, I'm doing fairly decent on time. So how do we prepare an application? Just have like a few very quick tips that I would go over for application management and narrative development. So from the start, like I mentioned before, you'll have usually an RFP or a NOFO or an RFA. Private funders usually have like that information on their website in the grant section, but it's usually organized by those same topic areas. You'll want to create a checklist that is going to have every single one of the application components built into this checklist. I recommend that the checklist is in a shared environment. I recommend that it's a more of a Gantt chart than a checklist. And a Gantt chart, is that project management tool that has like the different activities, the people who are associated. Really complicated ones have like a critical path, but that type of organization up front is going to save you. I can't even tell you how many times things accidentally get overlooked in terms of the compiling of an application. Last minute scrambling for a signature on a form is not fun. So everything that you can do to avoid that, do it. Now, you can't control if people are actually going to continue to check the checklist, which is part of the issue, but it at least gives you a roadmap. And in terms of creating that shared environment, I would recommend that it's a shared folder. I use Google Drive. I think it's really easy to collaboratively grant write in Google Drive. I do all my narrative development in there, and then you can kind of be in the document at the same time and have questions for each other, highlight things, making sure that that's done right up front as well. That's going to allow you to monitor the securing of all the supplemental documentation, and it's also going to help you facilitate having meetings. And that comes in so much handy after award. You will not believe how many times my old grant application Google folders have come in handy to a client that needs to report on an opportunity or grant, or can't remember what they promised that they would do, which is hopefully you're not in that boat. Every narrative, for the most part, has the same stuff in it. And now the state narratives are a little different because they're going to have like some very, very specific prompts. And there will be a handful of like specific prompts throughout your narrative. But generally speaking, this is the information that you need for your projects. And this is stuff that you honestly could pre-develop without even, well, once you've done your funding landscape analysis and you actually know that you're going in the right direction, but without identifying necessarily an impending due date, you could start to get this together, and develop it with programs so that when the due date does come up and you've got this quick turnaround time, you are writing something that is actually implementable. Just tips, I'm just gonna recap basically. Start with that checklist. Do not start a grant without a checklist. Establish who the core team is early and meet often. Core team is one finance person, one program person, one person who can get stuff done in the office. That's what makes up pretty much a good team. Then prioritize your logic model and your budget. Every grant, no matter how simple, has a logic model. And the simplest logic model is, this is a gap in our area, this is a need in our area, this is what we want to do to address that need. These are the outcomes that are associated with the needs, that are a result of the activities that we're going to do at its simplest form. Starting with that is so helpful in guiding the conversation for the rest of the grant development. And then do not leave the budget for last. Do the budget first. The budget actually helps me write grants. To be able to concretely see what you're asking money for helps me know how to develop a narrative. So it's important that you prioritize that. And with state grants and federal grants and even some private grants, more often than not, you have to provide like a staffing plan, a staffing narrative. The budget is definitely informing that staffing narrative, if it's including staff. So pulling that together is key. Integrate requirements and evaluation criteria in the narrative template. Every application, whether it's in a portal or submitted through email, whatever, has that list of questions. And sometimes, like when you go into the portal, you actually have to like click all the way through in order to see all the questions, if you know what I'm talking about. Take all of that and put it into a Google Doc or a Word doc. Copy and paste it all over, every single thing. Make sure you get the drop downs if there's drop downs. That is going to make sure that you're developing an application and including all the information that you need to. It helps reviewing, just makes things so much easier. When you do that narrative template, grab the requirements and the evaluation criteria and anything else that's on the funder's website, evidence-based practices, relevant blogs that have to do with the topic of funding, paste it into the narrative for its related question. So what you're going to do is be like gathering all the information into one space. I feel like it's like an overarching theme of this actually is just information gathering and organization. But it's going to allow you to make sure that every point in the narrative is speaking directly to the grant funder's requirements, the grant funder's evaluation criteria, if there's regulations or scopes of services that have to be embedded into certain responses, bringing those in, referencing them. It's very comprehensive. And there's a little psychology behind there too, because people are attracted to people who talk similarly to them. And so by using language that funders are comfortable with, or they use as a part of their own organizational culture, you're subconsciously aligning with them and the reviewer. Last two, use local and recent data for demonstrating needs. Don't just be happy with the data point that's from 2016. Usually, if you have a data point from 2016, you can figure out what that data source is and find it online and get something more updated. I'm going to go into actually data sources in the next section, so I'll touch on that later. And then finally, pay attention to seemingly minor details that could disqualify your application. So Every time that I do a HRSA application, which is the Health Resources Service Administration or something like that, it's a federal agency, I copy and paste the HRSA application formatting guidelines into a document and put it in the Google Drive or in the Google folder where I'm working on the application, because there are some really, really specific formatting requirements for those types of grants. There are really specific formatting requirements for all kinds of grants, whether that's that it has to be double spaced, that it has to be Times New Roman, that it has to be 12-point font, 1-inch margins, page numbered, putting your agency name and your EIN at the bottom and repeating on every page. I mean, the list goes on of the random stuff that you have to do to format your application. Make sure that you're paying attention to that. I just tip is like, if there are formatting requirements, I'm never not working in the application under different formatting requirements. If it's Times New Roman, I'm not working in Comic Sans or whatever. The other thing is naming conventions of files. I have had grant applications rejected from systems because the PDF name was too long or included a special character. Just all the little things that seem stupid, that result in technical errors or a formatting error that could disqualify you. Just have a list of it and check your application of it when you do your final edit. I threw this in here. Basically, how do you get what is a comprehensive grant writer? What is a good grant writer? To me, it's somebody that is technologically savvy, that is an expert Googler. They know they can Google up anything, like they can find your sister's boyfriend's child on Facebook or something like that type of person. And then also on the other side of the technology and the expert Googling, there's a consulting piece to grant writing. You're working with highly sensitive data, multiple different stakeholders, a lot of different subject experts. You want to make sure that that person is diplomatic. You want to make sure that when they get upset, they're not upsetting the rest of your staff. Um, and you want to make sure that if they're stressed out because of a deadline, it doesn't show. That to me is kind of like what a good grant writer is, besides the actual, ability to write. What are some trends? I wrote best practices, but honestly, this is more trends, I think. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm sure you're hearing DEI everywhere all the time. It's just a part of how we need to structure our governance, how we need to structure our programs, and now it's a part of the grant writing process as well. Um, Collaborative grant writing, I'll just talk a little bit about that. Where to find data, that's what I was mentioning earlier. So I'll talk a little bit about data sources, and then looking ahead, what can we expect for grant writing in the next year? So, like I mentioned, increasingly, you're seeing health disparities and DEI plans and DEI committees being integrated into your funding process. In order to receive a certain type of funding, you need to do a health equity assessment. You need to show you have a DEI plan. So I would honestly just recommend, like, start now. Just develop it. Develop a DEI plan right now. Use the national class standards. They're online. They're published. They're all around, like, creating an inclusive workforce, creating access to language interpreters, etc. And establish your committees. Have some committees that are going to allow you to gather community and participant feedback. The more that you're doing this now, the more ahead you're going to look in comparison to everybody else. Very few of my clients have DEI plans that they are currently implementing. I have some that have created DEI plans as a result of having to apply to grants that required them. And now they're in the process of actually implementing them and seeing if they are going to work. But just do it now. And make sure that while you're doing it, that you're integrating it with your quality process. Whatever your, quality improvement and monitoring is, build the DEI plan into that. Measure if there's disparities by geography, measure if there's disparities by race, ethnicity. Have ways to assess what your staffing diversity looks like, your recruitment strategies are for targeting individuals of diverse backgrounds, have actual numbers associated with what your goals might be for achieving those types of things, and then build out the data collecting tools to ensure that you're meeting them. So a collaborative grant is going to offer you an opportunity to access a broader pool of grants and larger funding amounts. I mean, just very simply, there are times when a funder only wants to support a university or institute of higher education. That doesn't mean that you can't somehow access that funding through a collaborative partnership with the university. So exploring what types of collaborative partnerships are going to give you access to some additional grants is a great way to begin to write collaborative grants. So using that grant growth area and funding landscape analysis to say, okay, like if we're going to develop out our research, then maybe we do want to have partnerships with some research organizations. More creatively, I had an organization that they were a disabilities provider, but they also had a business line that was involving animals, like an animal salon, I think it was. And I recommended like maybe collaborating with some animal shelters and accessing, additional funding that would be eligible to animal shelters. Um, so that could combine like vocational experiences for individuals with IDD through the salon, and then like some donations of their products to the shelter. But important is that you have guiding documents for your collaborative partnerships, not just in terms of like what your own project goals are, but what the partnership common goals are, like a charter. Like I would recommend if it's a large grant to develop some kind of charter to oversee what the partners' roles are, what they're committed to doing, what is the data sharing processes, all of that, or more formally through an MOU, a memorandum of understanding, or other type of like coordination of care agreement. Okay, data. The best, maybe this is subjective, but the best data source is data.census.gov because it's the most reliably accurate. Like the margins of errors on the data are generally more reliable. As you go more granular, you're going to get a little bit less reliable data, especially for the upstate New York area. If you're looking at things like zip code or even more so in the census tract and block group type geography, then it's a little bit harder to get accurate data just because of the lower responses of the census and the smaller populations in those areas. When you're utilizing census data, you're generally always going to want to use I don't know. I have always been taught to use the 5-year estimates. They're the estimates that average a 5-year span. So right now, the 5-year estimates that are most current are the 2017 to 2021. You can time compare on 5-year estimates for non-overlapping 5-year periods. So you can still get the historical analysis. It's just going to be more accurate because it has more of the year's data built into it. And obviously the American Community Survey, it has a wealth of information on the population, on housing stock, on all kinds of things. Data.census.gov, 5 years ago, I want to say, did an overhaul of their website and made it extremely easy to query. So I just highly recommend if you have time to even just take a look, explore in there, pull up some stats for your own county or your own zip code. CDC.gov has vitality data, so that's going to be like death rates and reasons for cause of death. And then they also have disabilities data. Um, EIG, Economic Innovation Group, has a distressed communities index that goes down, I think it's to the zip code level, but it could be one above, one below. And they basically have developed a way to rank all the communities in the United States based on their socioeconomic distress. So that's a really good one when you're applying to funding opportunities that are not necessarily for funders that are based in your area, giving them a relative idea of what the community distress is through this data source. Healthdata.gov has a bunch of health data. Health.data.newyork.gov has a bunch of New York related health data. Medicaid utilization, Medicare utilization, inpatient visits, I mean, everything. The data.newyork.gov, which health.data.newyork.gov is a subcomponent of, is a bunch of other data for New York, tons of it. Highly recommend taking a glance at that, just so you know what's out there. The behavioral risk factor surveys in there, tons of stuff. opwdd.newyork.gov/data has all the data. I hope that most of you are familiar with a little bit with that one. New York Prevention Agenda benchmarks different counties' performance to the state and to the prevention agenda goals, which I believe will change in 2020. Well, the prevention agenda was through 2024. The New York opioid tracker is going to track opioid overdoses and deaths. The NICED data is New York State education data. I use that data sometimes for also for understanding like childhood poverty, childhood disabilities in certain localities or school districts because they have student population demographics there. The HUD Continuum of Care data on housing and homelessness also has data on different, marginalized populations in the housing stock in the area. And then there's other like regional data compilations that are both free and paid, and you can access those like CNY Vitals to get or what I should have listed here is countyhealthrankings.org. Those types of resources are pulling information from like the health.data.newyork.gov and cdc.gov and data.census.gov and putting them all in one spot so that you can search for your area and then get the information quickly without having to go to multiple different lookup sources. I know I have 17 minutes and I feel like it's perfect timing. So the next couple of things I just wanted to bring up. People, they're saying we're heading into some kind of like recession or whatever, but an analysis of the recession in 2006 through 2008 found that funders will typically support emergency needs during that time: food insecurity, foreclosure prevention, emergency assistance, counseling, things that just keep people stable, keep communities stable. We're also seeing that there is an increase in the multi-year grant awards for funders, private funders. More and more, there are private funders that are offering the ability to ask for funding that is over the span of 24 months or 36 months or 18 months, rather than just a 12-month grant period. This is a great way to take advantage of having a consistent source support a pilot project. So I would encourage you to reach out to funders that may not explicitly say that they are supporting multi-year or longer funding periods to see if they'd be amenable to supporting a longer term project. And especially if you're going to do the grant growth areas type of strategic analysis, you probably want something that's going to support the first 3 years. Then the last thing is artificial intelligence and grant writing. So I know, like, with the use of Chat GPT and all of the other different AI resources out there, you're probably thinking to yourself, is grant writing going to be extinct in a couple of years? Am I just going to be able to copy and paste a narrative into a Chat GPT and have it write a response for me? Um, Honestly, maybe. And I would hope that the funding landscape changes a little bit so that we don't have to do all of this narrative development and we can focus more on outcomes, and implementation plans and trusting nonprofits to actually implement the way it needs to be implemented, just hold them accountable for the deliverables they say that they're going to achieve. But to get off my soapbox on that and come back to AI, how can you use it right now to write grants? I use it right now to write grants. It makes my life very, very, very easy. There are a lot of different ways that you can integrate it. One is very simply just copy and pasting your grant narrative into a openai.chatgpt.com text box and saying, smooth the following out for me. And it will just make the writing sound better. Sometimes I am stuck on writing a very boring description of a project director. How many times do I have to write a project director description? Well, now I can go in ChatGPT and say, describe the role of a project director for a grant that involves a capital project, okay, and multiple different partners. That they will create a paragraph for you. They also do, it does implementation plans, all of that is wonderful. But that alone is not enough to get you to a place of having a competitive grant or an implementable grant. And that's where you want to make, that's, I feel like, what I've been harping on this entire time, in addition to the organization piece and the information gathering, is the purpose for that is that not only are you competitively securing grants, but you're securing grants that you can do, that your program can implement, that you can meet the objectives of. Um, and so the AI resources that exist out there that can help you guide what your implementation plan might be, or fluff your narrative or write it so it's more easily comprehended, that's wonderful. But we're far from a AI resource that's going to be able to take all of your information that you have and pull it into a grant narrative. Now, there is one. There is a grant writing AI tool. I'm blanking on the name right now because I'm doing this entire presentation from memory. So I will send it to everybody, or have someone send it to everybody. But the tool allows you to upload past narratives that you've written or program descriptions, and then imp, import the like narrative template, and then it will merge things for you. So it can make things go a lot faster and more efficient. The strategy part of grant, the researching part of grants, the implementation part, the outcome part, that's got to be driven by your program and by you. But writing something that sounds good, AI is great and saves a lot of time. So highly recommend looking into it if you have time. This is the last thing, and I'm not even, oops, that's my thing quick because I never use Canva. Well, I have a list of upcoming grant opportunities, and I know that this is getting sent around, so you'll see it through there, and I'll just verbally tell you what a couple of them are. So there are a number of grant opportunities due this month that might be of interest, depending on the region that you're in, or the population that you serve. Some of them have quick turnarounds. The Reeve Foundation, which is like Christopher and Dana Reeve, they have a quality of life grant that is due on the 11th. The application isn't too difficult. It is fairly quick to pull together. You just need to understand exactly what your outcomes are going to be that you'll report on. And Breathe Foundation too, by the way, they focus on individuals living with paralysis. So you'd want an emphasis on that group of people. The New York Health Foundation has an LOI, letter of intent, due on the 23rd of October. A fairly quick application process. I think it's like 5 questions and a handful of administrative documents. So that is for, I can't remember if I said this already, for supporting a more equitable food system. Then the Community Foundation of Herkimer and Oneida County has a grant opportunity due on the 26th of this month for health, education, and sciences. Theirs is a very straightforward application that does not require any attachments and is done through a submittable form, basically. The Golisano Foundation, they're focused more in Western and Central New York area, but they have you've probably heard of like the Golisano Children's Center. They are a big funder in this area of children and people with IDD. So that's one that has a application due December 15th, but prior to that application, informally, you submit a letter of intent, then you will be invited to a full application by the 15th. Lastly, if you get Grants Gateway notifications, then right before this call, you probably got one for the Nonprofit Infrastructure Program. That is a capital grant that is run through the Dormitory Authority of New York, DASNY, you've probably heard, and that will support capital improvements in last year's projects or this year's projects range from like $100,000 to $2 million. You can go look up the program online through DASNY, and they have a list of their previously funded projects. Take a look at those. Lots of disability providers are on there. So that might be something that's worth applying to. But again, it's a state grant. I haven't looked at the application yet this year, but it's probably a pretty high level of effort. And you're going to want to get started on that now, even though it's due January 12th, 2024. Lastly, open application to Health Foundation of Western Central New York. They just released a brand new application portal. So it looks like they're accepting new applications there, but there is no associated deadline. So that's another one that may be of interest. Those are upcoming opportunities. And then I also listed out like 6 other funders that might be of interest to you, ranging from national to like New York based. So you can take a look at those when I send it over. So with this last 10 minutes, I can just take some questions. I'm sorry for talking so much.
So I saw in the chat box, in the Q&A box, somebody did ask earlier if a copy of the presentation would be shared. So Alyssa, I'm not sure if you'd want to share a PDF of the slides, but we can put the recording on our website.
Yeah, I can share a PDF of the
Yeah,
slides.
so what we can do, just anybody who's wondering, after the event, we can email all the attendees. We'll probably do that tomorrow and send you a copy of that presentation. I'm just looking to see if we have any, I don't personally see any questions. Let's see.
Someone asked if you have no experience, can you do this? Yes. Just go slowly, one at a time, take one potential idea and see if you can build it out to create a logic model. And then once you have that sticky idea, find the funders that support that and keep it small and contained to just this one concept. I've done this many times with like capital projects, for example, that are like on the smaller side, renovation projects.
Anybody else have questions? Can feel free to put them in the chat box.
There's also, I'll say too, a really, really great resource. I think it's called the Comprehensive Grant Writer. I know I have a copy of it. Once, let me. I'll have to find it also. That's the other thing I need to send to you. So I'll find it and I'll send it to everybody. But there's this book called like the Comprehensive Grant Writer or something similar to that. And it will basically, it walks you through a lot of the stuff that I kind of talk about, maybe a little bit differently, like less about the strategic planning side, but more on the like, how do I day-to-day manage grants?
Let's see, we do have a comment. This was a validating workshop. I've been grant coordinating for almost a year and a half, and the processes you shared mirror mine, and I was able to pick up a lot of other helpful tips for my future in this position, so thank you. So Alyssa, it sounds like definitely struck a chord with a few people here, which is great. We do have one other question, if you are available for trainings.
I would say email me. So I have limited availability, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a way to make it work. So just shoot me an email and we can coordinate.
Great.
I tried to just send my email in there, but it's not letting me send anything, maybe because I'm a panelist.
What's your email, Alyssa?
Alyssa, ALYSSA at Spina, SPINA, LLC.com.
I should be able to.
Thank you.
I just entered it in there. Yeah.
And I'm glad to see that other grant writers are also utilizing a lot of these processes. It's good to know.
Okay, excellent. I think that we could probably, I think that we'll call that on the questions. Yep, I'm looking. I don't see anything else, just some thank yous in the box. So I'll let Angie take it away and finish up our presentation today.
Thanks, Megan, and thank you so much, Alyssa. You really did share such valuable information. I think everybody's taking away a lot. As a reminder, the directors of provider relations were available to assist providers with any questions or concerns that you may have. The coverage areas and contact info for each director is available on the provider page of both CCO's websites, both LifePlan CCO and ACANY. We also encourage you to utilize our respective customer service centers. We hope to see you all at our next provider webinar. As always, we welcome your suggestions for future webinar topics. Thank you. Have a nice evening, everyone.